Every morning, my day starts the same way. At exactly 6 o'clock, my alarm rings, breaking the quiet stillness of Brooklyn Heights. As I push back the curtains, the hazy outline of Manhattan skyscrapers comes into view. No matter how many times I see it, the sight always brings a strange sense of calm. On my vanity, a silver framed family photo from last Christmas catches my eye. My sister, April, stands proudly in the center, flanked by our smiling parents. And then there's me, Caroline Wilson, off to the side, offering my usual reserved smile. Let's do our best today. It is a habit of mine to say this to myself in the mirror every morning. After a quick shower, I slip into my navy pantsuit, smoothing out any creases, and carefully arrange my brown hair. As a senior manager at a major accounting firm, looking polished is part of the job. By the window in the living room, my herb plants stand neatly in a row. The familiar scent of rosemary and thyme fills the air, a small comfort amid my structured routine. On weekends, I often sit here with a book, classical music playing softly in the background. Early as always, dear? Stepping outside, I hear the familiar voice of Mrs. Johnson from across the street. In her 70s now, she has become like a grandmother to me, always tending to her garden with care. Good morning, Mrs. Johnson. Your flowers are looking beautiful today. She beams at the compliment but quickly shifts the conversation. Oh, did you see April's news? She is doing so well on Wall Street. Your parents must be incredibly proud. I pause for a brief second before forcing a smile. Yes, she has worked hard, I reply. But a familiar weight settles in my chest. My sister, April, is a rising star in the investment world, earning a salary that makes mine look modest in comparison. She lives in a high-rise Manhattan apartment, wears nothing but designer brands, and is constantly in the social media spotlight. Growing up, it was always the same. Our parents' attention gravitated toward April. Even when I excelled, her smallest achievements were met with greater enthusiasm. My acceptance into graduate school was barely acknowledged, yet her high school report card had been framed on the living room wall. On the subway, I find myself thinking back to last night's family dinner. A long-standing tradition, Sunday dinners at our parents' house remain non-negotiable. April, sweetheart, tell us your exciting news again. My mother's voice had been full of excitement as she carved the roast beef. Oh, it is really nothing, April had replied with mock modesty, though the pride in her eyes was unmistakable. My father, never missing an opportunity, turned to me. Caroline, you should take after your sister. Be more ambitious. I had simply nodded, knowing that arguing would be pointless. My own successes, securing a promotion, leading a high-profile project, were not worth mentioning in their eyes. At work, the familiar chaos of the office greets me. Audits, tax filings, reports, precision and reliability are everything in my world. Miss Wilson, could you check these figures? Jessica, one of the newer hires, approaches timidly. My reputation is one of being firm but fair. Of course. Take a seat, I say, scanning the calculations. Through the window, the Manhattan skyline looms in the distance. Somewhere among those skyscrapers is my sister's office. The thought lingers for a moment, a flicker of something unspoken passing through my mind, before I push it aside and refocus. My life is stable, predictable, and secure. Yet, beneath the surface, something feels unfinished, like an equation that does not quite add up. But stability does not last forever. And that night, everything changed. At exactly 8 o'clock on February 15th, I was rushing toward the subway station, rain tapping against my umbrella as I hurried along Atlantic Avenue. The Brooklyn Bridge stretched ahead, its towering cables illuminated by the streetlights. I was going over the next day's audit checklist in my head, already planning the order of my morning tasks. The pedestrian light turned green. Without thinking, I stepped forward. Then, out of nowhere, headlights. A roaring engine. Tires screeching on the slick pavement. No time to react. A crushing impact. My body lifted into the air. Then nothing. Darkness. Strangely, Just before losing consciousness, I heard my mother's voice echo in my head. Caroline, why cannot you be more like April? Bright white lights. The sharp scent of antiseptic. The rhythmic beeping of machines. Miss Wilson, can you hear me? My eyelids felt impossibly heavy, but I forced them open. A doctor stood above me, his white coat stark against the sterile hospital room. You were in an accident. You are at New York Presbyterian Brooklyn Methodist Hospital. You have been unconscious for about 2 hours. A nurse adjusted the monitors beside me, checking the wires attached to my body. The entire scene felt unreal, as if I were watching from a distance. I tried to move, and agony shot through my body. My right leg was locked in a heavy cast. My chest and abdomen ached with every shallow breath. A bandage covered the side of my face where I must have been cut. The doctor continued, his voice steady but serious. Your X-rays and tests are back. Surgery is necessary tonight to set the fracture in your leg. We may need to address internal bleeding as well. The operation will take about 3 hours. My head was spinning, but one thought broke through the haze. My family. The doctor nodded. We have contacted your emergency contacts. A small sense of relief washed over me. Surely, my parents would be on their way. Just after the nurse left, my phone rang. Seeing Mom on the screen, I felt a moment of relief, until I answered. Caroline. My mother's voice was clipped, hesitant. Mom, I was in an accident. Yes, the hospital called. She cut me off. But listen. There was a pause, one that stretched too long. Today is April's award ceremony. She's receiving the Analyst of the Year award. It is a very important event. For a moment, I struggled to understand what she was saying. We cannot come to the hospital today, she continued, her tone firm but rushed. We have to be there for April. I gripped the phone tighter, my hand trembling. But I need surgery, tonight. My voice wavered. A different voice came through the line, my father's. Caroline, this is crucial for April's career. You will be fine. There are nurses there, right? I felt the last bit of strength drain from my body. I understand, I whispered, swallowing the lump in my throat. The call ended. Silence settled over the hospital room, broken only by the steady rhythm of the foredrip. I reached for the remote and turned on the television, needing something, anything, to fill the void. And there it was. April's awards ceremony was being broadcast live. The Grand Cipriani Wall Street ballroom glittered under towering chandeliers. My sister stood on stage, dazzling in an expensive gown, a triumphant smile on her face. In the front row, my parents sat beaming with pride, clapping enthusiastically. They looked happy. They looked perfect. And I was here, alone. Tears blurred my vision, but I could not even lift my arm to wipe them away. The foreline restricted my movement, and the pain in my chest made every breath ache. Outside the window, a light rain fell, the Manhattan skyline glowing in the distance. In this dim, sterile hospital room, illuminated only by the cold blue light of the TV, I watched them celebrate. The clock ticked mercilessly toward my surgery. But the ache in my heart was far heavier than the physical pain. The door opened softly, and Nurse Maria stepped inside. Her warm, knowing eyes landed on the screen before she quietly lowered the volume. Will your family be here soon? She asked gently. I shook my head. Maria nodded in quiet understanding. I am going to start the premedication. You might feel sleepy soon. Just rest, okay? She adjusted the floor, and I stared up at the ceiling. For the first time, I looked at my life from a distance, my relentless work ethic, my parents' neglect, the role I had always played in this family. Something in me shifted. As they wheeled my bed down the fluorescent-lit hallway toward the operating room, I made a silent vow. This surgery, this night, would mark the beginning of something new. When I woke, the room was bathed in the faint light of dawn. The night nurse stood at my bedside, speaking softly. The surgery went well. You need rest, but you are stable. Pain lingered dull and deep, but I forced myself to focus. I was alive. I had made it through. Then my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Mom. The time reads 7:15 a.m. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the button. But eventually I answered. Caroline, where are you? You are still at the hospital? Her voice was high-pitched, frantic. Yes. The surgery is over. In the background, I heard my father's voice, sharp, anxious. We need to see you. Right now. Visiting hours do not start until. That does not matter. My father's voice boomed through the speaker, urgent in a way I had never heard before. Before I could respond, a sudden commotion erupted from the television. Breaking news. Major investment firm scandal. Rising Wall Street star April Wilson arrested for financial fraud. I sat up too quickly, pain shooting through my body. The screen showed April, still in the designer suit she had worn the night before, being led away in handcuffs. Her face was hidden behind her hands as reporters swarmed her. The suspect is accused of embezzling approximately $20 million in client funds. Evidence suggests the money was used for luxury goods, overseas travel, and other personal expenses. I felt frozen in place. The grand awards ceremony. The glowing praise. The adoring audience. Had it all been a lie? Before I could process it, the hospital room door burst open. My parents rushed inside. Mother's makeup was smeared, her face swollen from crying. My father, usually composed, looked utterly defeated. Caroline, please, help April. Mother grabbed my hand, her fingers cold and trembling. Her bail is set at $3 million. We are putting up our assets as collateral, but it is not enough. Father stepped forward, regaining some of his usual authority. We need to use your savings. My savings. The money I had carefully built over the years. My $1.8 million, saved through discipline and sacrifice, ensuring my future security. We cannot let April go to prison. My mother sobbed. She is young. Her whole life will be ruined. Father's voice grew firm. If you give us everything, we can cover the rest. I closed my eyes. The Ford drip beeped softly beside me, the only steady thing in the room. Slowly, I opened my mouth. Why were you not here last night? Silence. I lifted my gaze. I was alone, going into surgery. And you chose an awards ceremony over me. My mother faltered. Caroline, this is not the time for, which turned out to be a fraud, too. I said, my voice steadier than I expected. She opened her mouth but had no response. My father's frustration erupted. Are you going to abandon your sister? At that moment, Nurse Maria walked in. I am sorry, but she needs to rest. The authority in her voice left no room for argument. My parents hesitated. Then, reluctantly, they stepped back toward the door. My mother turned, eyes pleading. But I said nothing. And for the first time, I did not feel guilty about it. Back in the silent hospital room, I let out a slow breath. Outside the window, New York City was waking up, its usual rhythm continuing without pause. As Nurse Maria checked my blood pressure, her voice was gentle. Right now, your recovery, both physical and emotional, is what matters most. I gave her a small nod, absorbing her words. The thoughts I had pushed aside for years were forcing their way to the surface. My relationship with my family, my place within it, everything was demanding a decision. But for the first time, I felt that focusing on myself might be the right choice. The television in the corner continued its relentless coverage of my sister's arrest. One by one, the details of her fraud unraveled, the truth behind the glamorous image she had cultivated. And deep inside, I knew something within me was changing, too. 2 weeks later, I stepped into the elevator of my parents' luxury apartment building on the Upper East Side. My cane pressed against my palm as I shifted my weight, still recovering from the accident. Standing beside me was James Murphy, a corporate attorney from my firm and someone I had come to trust. Are you ready? Murphy asked in a steady voice. I gave a small nod. The elevator doors opened. My mother answered the door almost immediately. Normally polished and composed, she now looked exhausted, her makeup uneven, her hair hastily pinned back. "Caroline," she said, her voice caught between hope and anxiety. I stepped inside. My father was waiting in the living room, his expression tight. The large windows showcased a pristine view of Central Park, once a symbol of my family's wealth, but now, to me, it felt strangely hollow. His eyes flicked to Murphy. "You brought a lawyer?" His voice was edged with irritation. I met his stare calmly. "This is also a legal matter." Setting my cane against the sofa, I eased myself into a seat. A thick folder lay on the coffee table. "This is the latest report from April's defense team," I said, nodding toward it. My father picked it up, flipping through the pages. His brow furrowed. "The total amount of misappropriated funds is now estimated at $25 million. A small gasp escaped my mother's lips. "But if we can just make bail." I met her desperate gaze. "Bail will not make her crimes disappear," I said evenly. "She needs to face the consequences of her actions. You know that." My mother's voice cracked. "Do you understand how I felt? Alone in a hospital bed, waiting for surgery while my family was celebrating a fraud?" Silence swallowed the room. My father exhaled, shifting his tone to something softer. "Let's not dwell on the past, Caroline. Right now, we need to stand together as a family." A bitter smile tugged at my lips. "Family?" I echoed. A sharp pain flared in my leg as I moved to stand, but I ignored it. "You celebrated April's success, but dismissed my achievements. You basked in her spotlight while barely acknowledging my efforts. And when I was lying in a hospital bed, you chose an awards ceremony over me." I looked directly at my mother. "And now you want to talk about family?" Tears filled her eyes. "You have become so cold," she whispered. "Are you really going to abandon your sister?" My voice remained steady. "Abandon? I was the one who was abandoned." Murphy cleared his throat, pulling out another set of documents. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, let me clarify the legal situation." My father leaned forward, tension building in his jaw. "What are you getting at?" Murphy remained composed. "April's charges extend far beyond misappropriation of funds. There are strong allegations of organized investment fraud, document forgery, and tax evasion. Even if bail is posted, further indictments are likely." I added, "Additionally, paying bail will trigger an investigation into the source of those funds. Banks and tax authorities will scrutinize every transaction. I refuse to be implicated in this." My father's face darkened. "What exactly are you saying?" I took a breath. "I am saying that I will not be complicit in April's crimes. In fact," I met his eyes evenly, "I have decided to provide the prosecution with information on past financial irregularities." My father shot to his feet. "You are going to expose our family's name to the world?" For the first time, my voice rose. "You mean expose the truth?" My mother sobbed, burying her face in her hands. My father took a step closer, his anger radiating. "Have you forgotten what we did for you? The sacrifices we made to raise you?" Slowly, I stood on my own. "Love is not a debt to be repaid," I said. "And demanding a return for raising your child? That is not family. That is control." His voice erupted, raw with fury. "Get out! You are no longer my daughter." I inhaled deeply. Maybe we were never truly family to begin with. The weight of those words settled over the room. Murphy picked up my bag, and together, we stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, he studied me for a moment. "You handled that well." I let out a small breath, a quiet smile forming. "For the first time, I feel like myself." Stepping out of the building, the crisp spring air greeted me. The trees in Central Park were just beginning to bud, signaling a new season ahead. I climbed into a taxi, glancing up at the sky. This was not an ending. This was a beginning. That evening, a call came from the district attorney's office. More evidence had surfaced. Additional charges would be filed against April. My mother's name flashed across my phone screen, call after call. I let them ring. Returning to my Brooklyn brownstone, I saw Mrs. Johnson kneeling in her front yard, planting new flowers. She looked up and smiled. "Welcome home, dear." Her hands patted the soil gently. "I am planting new flowers. They will bloom beautifully by spring." I smiled back. "Yes, they will." A new season was beginning. By September 2024, Brooklyn Heights gleamed under the crisp early autumn sunlight. Near the promenade, a sleek sign now adorned an office building, Wilson and Associates Accounting. As I stepped through the front door, I took a moment to reflect on everything that had changed in the past 6 months. From the windows, Manhattan's skyline stretched before me, the high-rises once tied to my sister's old office now just part of the city's endless landscape. "Good morning, Miss Wilson." Sarah, my receptionist, greeted me with a warm smile. She was one of the colleagues who had followed me when I started my own firm. "Morning," I replied, setting my briefcase on the counter. Sarah lowered her voice slightly. "Did you see the news?" I gave a small nod. It had been all over the morning broadcasts, April's sentencing. 15 years. With the additional evidence that had surfaced, the total sum of her misappropriations had exceeded $30 million. The consequences stretched beyond her alone. My father's real estate company was crumbling, losing one contract after another as major clients cut ties in the wake of the scandal. I still received occasional messages from my parents, desperate, emotional attempts to draw me back in, but I never responded. "Miss Wilson, here are the materials for the 10 o'clock meeting." Jessica, one of my newest hires, entered my office carrying a neatly stacked file. Like Sarah, she had supported me when I decided to go independent. "Thank you," I said, flipping through the documents. "By the way, how's the Pro Anno project coming along?" Jessica smiled. "The improvements to the accounting system for the Single Mother Support Center are right on track." After starting my own firm, I had made the decision to dedicate a portion of our profits to social contribution initiatives. It was something I had thought deeply about, what true success should really look like. "Caroline!" I turned at the familiar voice and found Mrs. Johnson standing in the doorway, holding a bouquet. "This is for you, dear. Congratulations on 6 months since opening your firm. I grew these flowers myself." I took the bouquet, the colors of the roses and geraniums catching the afternoon light. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Johnson beamed. "And last Sunday's dinner was just lovely." Sunday dinners used to mean tense, uncomfortable gatherings with my family, where April was the center of attention and I was barely acknowledged. Now they had become something else entirely: warm, lively home gatherings with neighbors and friends. Connections built on kindness, not obligation. "Oh, and I got the concert tickets," Mrs. Johnson added excitedly. "Carnegie Hall next month, right?" "Yes. It's been so long since we enjoyed a proper concert." The luxury of classical music on the weekends, something I had once loved, had returned to my life. That afternoon, a call came in from Murphy. "April is requesting to see you." I did not hesitate. "Tell her no. I am not going back to the past." Outside my window, boats drifted steadily along the East River, the sunlight dancing on the water. Even the bridge where I had been struck by that car, once a symbol of everything that had shattered, felt different now. On my desk sat a new family photo. Not the old one, where I stood awkwardly at the edge while my parents and sister took center stage. This one had been taken at our office opening party. Staff members, Mrs. Johnson, new friends, each smile was real, every connection genuine. "Caroline, could you do a final check on this proposal?" Michael, a senior staff member, stepped into my office holding a thick binder. "Of course," I said with a smile. I had always been dedicated to my work, but for the first time, I truly understood the joy of it. Not just the numbers, not just the precision, but the bonds built through integrity and trust. As the day wound down, I tidied up my office and glanced out the window. One by one, Manhattan's lights flickered on, illuminating the city in a quiet, steady glow. Life had taken unexpected turns. There had been loss, disappointment, and pain. But if you held on to what truly mattered, a new path always revealed itself. I reached for my gardening gloves, stepping onto my balcony where my small herb plants awaited. Tomorrow was a new day, and I would welcome it, just as I always had, standing firmly on my own feet.